We begin the day with U.S. President Donald Trump threatening to expand attacks on Iran's civilian infrastructure, writing on social media that U.S. forces are, quote, yet to begin destroying what's left. The threat follows American strikes on a major bridge and two of Iran's largest steel plants. Iran says it will target energy and water facilities around the Gulf in retaliation.
A key bridge in Iran severed by U.S. airstrikes. The suspension bridge links the city of Karaj to the capital Tehran. Said to be one of the tallest in the Middle East, it was due to open this year. Civilian infrastructure like this is supposed to be protected by international law. After the strike, U.S. President Donald Trump told Iran to make a deal before it's too late, warning that he's just getting started. Posting on Truth Social, Trump said, "Our military, the greatest and most powerful by far anywhere in the world, hasn't even started destroying what's left in Iran. Bridges next, then electrical power plants. New regime leadership knows what has to be done and has to be done fast." Iran's foreign minister rejected Trump's calls for a truce in an interview with Al Jazeera.
Our conditions for ending the war are completely clear. We do not accept a ceasefire. Rather, we seek a complete end to the war, not only in Iran, but across the entire region, and the provision of comprehensive guarantees that such aggressions will not happen again.
The Iranian Red Crescent posted this video said to show the aftermath of a U.S.-Israeli airstrike on a warehouse. The group says more than 300 health facilities have been damaged in the war. Medical sites are also protected under international law. With attacks escalating on both sides, the United Nations has warned that the war could soon engulf the Middle East.
Fawaz Gerges is a professor of Middle Eastern politics and international relations at the London School of Economics and joins me now. Fawaz, the U.S. stepping up their targeting of civilian infrastructure in Iran. How does that contribute to the U.S. and Israel achieving their war goals?
In his address to the nation on Wednesday evening, President Trump told the American people that he is going to bomb Iran to take it back to the Stone Ages where it belongs. I think President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gamble that destroying Iran's state capabilities, schools, universities, pharmaceuticals, bridges, steel factories, infrastructure, could basically force Iranian leaders to surrender, to submit, which is very much delusional. What does this tell you? It tells you that President Trump is strategically boxed in. He has entrapped himself in a very, very difficult and complex situation, and he is doubling down. So on multiple levels, what we are seeing now really is more, basically the war has shifted from its initial military objectives into military and economic targets, particularly against Iran, and Iran is targeting its neighbors in the Gulf as well, infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Trump said on Truth Social that what he called the new regime leadership knew what needed to be done. Do you know who he's talking about here? Who is the U.S.'s interlocutor at this point?
For your own viewers, there is no direct or indirect talks between Iran and the United States. According to all Western intelligence services, all, including the American intelligence services and the German intelligence services and the Gulf intelligence services, Iran refuses to engage diplomatically with the United States under, current conditions. I think Iran's strategy can be summarized as follows: more and more economic pain to force President Trump to blink first. So what we are seeing now, I think sadly and tragically, we are on an escalation ladder, that what comes next is much worse than we have seen in the past 4 weeks. So it's very concerning how the war is escalating now between Iran and its allies on the one hand, and the United States and Israel as well.
That was Alice Fawaz Georgis. We appreciate your insights as always. Thanks so much. Dozens of legal scholars say the U.S. and Israeli attack on Iran breached international law. In an open letter published on Thursday, the experts say the war clearly violates the United Nations Charter, which bars the use of force outside self-defense unless authorized by the UN Security Council. The letter referenced an attack in the first days of the war when a blast destroyed a primary school in the city of Minab and killed almost 170 children and staff. Experts have found that evidence indicates the explosion was caused by a U.S. airstrike. The Trump administration says an investigation is underway into the incident. The law experts also described as alarming rhetoric threats to attack civilian infrastructure such as power plants. They wrote, the initiation of the campaign was a clear violation of the United Nations Charter and the conduct of United States forces since, as well as statements made by senior government officials, raise serious concerns about violations of international human rights law and international humanitarian law, including potential war crimes. Oona Hathaway is a professor of international law at Yale Law School and one of the authors of this letter. Oona, thank you so much for joining us. What moved you to write this letter?
Well, many of us have been very concerned about the way in which this war is being fought and the fact that it's been fought at all. We're aware of the fact that the war is in violation of the United Nations Charter and that it appears that rules of international humanitarian law are also being violated in the course of the war. And as U.S. international lawyers, we felt it was our responsibility to speak out, to make clear what we see as the clear violations of international law taking place in the course of this war, and to explain to news media and anyone who would read kind of the details of the law, because it is very technical, and sometimes that makes it hard to understand. But part of our role here is to try to explain what the law is, how it's being violated, and why that matters.
Let's go through all of these. What makes this case so unambiguous, in your opinion?
Well, the decision to launch the war in the first place was clearly in violation of the United Nations Charter. So the Charter provides that states can use military force if it's authorized by the UN Security Council, which clearly this is not, or if a state is acting in its own self-defense or in the collective self-defense of another state that is threatened by or subject to an armed attack. Neither of those is present here. The U.S. didn't offer a justification for acting in self-defense. It hasn't explained that there was some imminent threat of an attack. And it hasn't attempted to justify the decision to launch the war at this moment under international law to explain why it's consistent with international law and the treaties that we've agreed to. And then international humanitarian law as well. So international humanitarian law is a law that governs the conduct of the war. And we have seen some really troubling events in the course of this war. Just recently, the bombing of a bridge, schools have been hit, a number of residential buildings have been hit, and the president and the Secretary of Defense have threatened to bomb Iran back to the Stone Ages, to attack the electrical grid, to attack water treatment plants. And all of these, if they actually were carried out, would be war crimes. And so we think it's really important to raise the alarm about these issues now, hopefully in a way that will lead the United States to change course.
Yeah. Now, the debate often hinges on imminent threat, and Israel actually argues that there was, in fact, an imminent threat. They're part of this war. Can you explain how imminent threat is defined in international law and why Iran, in your opinion, doesn't meet that threshold here?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that is sometimes kind of confusing. Now, it's important to note that the United Nations Charter actually doesn't use the word imminent threat. It only says that a state has a right of self-defense if it's subject to an armed attack. But over time, that has come to be understood, okay, even if you haven't been attacked yet, if attack is about to happen, the tanks are on the border, they're about to come in, it would be absurd to say that you couldn't respond if there was an imminent threat and there's no moment for deliberation or opportunity to stop the threat. You don't have to wait for the attack to take place. But that doesn't excuse preemptive uses of force. It doesn't excuse preventive uses of force. And here, neither the US nor Israel has explained what prompted the decision to use military force at this moment. Why, at this moment, was it necessary to use force? Was it the case that there's actually intelligence that there was an attack that was imminent? They haven't provided any evidence that that's the case, which makes us think that it's not likely. The president, in explaining the decision to go to war, has said that there's 47 years of imminence, but that's not how imminence works. It can't be the case that you perceive an overtime threat and then you decide to act. So nothing that has been said thus far meets the legal standard for imminence.
You spoke earlier about the strike on the Minab primary school. We saw now the destruction of Iran's biggest bridge. I guess, and I hope you can explain it to me, the burden of proof, if this ever goes to court and somebody has to respond to these acts, is pretty high. What would need to be proven for these acts to qualify as a war crime?
Well, what makes it very difficult to prove a war crime is that you not only have to show the act that's taken place, that is the attack on civilians or civilian objects, or attack on a military objective that has an excessive harm to civilians, but you also have to show intent. So you have to show that they knew that it was a civilian object. They knew that there were excessive civilians that were going to be harmed. Or even if they didn't know, but they had reason to know, or they should have known, therefore they acted recklessly. So it is difficult for an outside observer to say 100% sure that is absolutely a war crime. But what makes the school bombing so troubling is that public evidence was widely available that that building was being used as a school for more than a decade. There was pattern of life. You know, if anyone had taken the trouble to view the videos over time of the building and its use, would have seen that people are arriving and leaving on a schedule that's consistent with the school, and that there are people of the size that are consistent with that building being used as a school. And so it seems that at the very least, they didn't take the time and trouble to update the maps to ensure that the targets that they're selecting were in fact lawful military targets. So there's a lot of really hard questions that need to be asked. There ought to be an investigation of these strikes that have caused significant civilian casualties. And we ought to know whether the process for reviewing targets and ensuring that they are lawful and consistent with our obligations under the Geneva Conventions and customary international law, that those have been met. And traditionally, the United States has been very careful about meeting its obligations. It has an extensive legal review process for target selection. And when there's an allegation of civilian casualties, there's a process for investigation and ensuring that there is careful review to know whether there were mistakes that were made, whether they were intentional or not, and potentially to bring criminal charges against those who are responsible if, in fact, there was an intentional violation of international law.
Yeah.
And this could also include careful review of ensuring that we have the information we need to make sure that the targets are actually lawful targets.
The president told the New York Times in January that he doesn't need international law. If leaders stop abiding by it, the moment it becomes inconvenient for them, where does that leave the international rules-based order?
Yeah, I mean, this is what's in some ways most troubling about what's happened, is that it's not just that the president has been taking action, ordering a war that's in violation of international law, but he seems to evidence complete disregard for international law and for the rules of the international system. He said he doesn't need international law. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has said that he doesn't believe in what he calls stupid rules of engagement, which are rules that are made to ensure the U.S. is abiding by international law. So it's not just that they're interpreting the law in ways that we find implausible or that we disagree with. It's that they seem to be prepared to throw the law out altogether. And for a state like the United States, that's traditionally been a champion of the international system, an imperfect one at times, of course, but nonetheless has really led the charge to create this international legal system that we have and to support it over the last 8 decades. For that very same country to be acting as if these rules don't matter really opens the door to a downward slide globally in the abidance by international law. And the people who are going to pay the price are ordinary civilians around the world who are not in a position to make decisions about whether their states are going to war or not.
Oona Hathaway of the International Law Department at Yale Law School. Thank you so much. Pleasure having you on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Fawaz Gerges is a professor of Middle Eastern politics and international relations at the London School of Economics and joins me now. Fawaz, the U.S. stepping up their targeting of civilian infrastructure in Iran. How does that contribute to the U.S. and Israel achieving their war goals?
Important question you're asking. In his address to the nation on Wednesday evening, President Trump told the American people that he is going to bomb Iran to take it back to the Stone Ages where it belongs. I think President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gamble that destroying Iran's state capabilities, schools, universities, pharmaceuticals, bridges, steel factories, infrastructure, could basically force Iranian leaders to surrender, to submit, which is very much delusional. What does this tell you? It tells you that President Trump is strategically boxed in. He has entrapped himself in a very, very difficult and complex situation, and he is doubling down. Just today, more than 100 American experts on international law from universities like Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford, basically said that the conduct of the American forces and the statement by US officials raised serious questions about violation of international humanitarian law, including potential war crimes. So on multiple levels, what we are seeing now really is more, basically the war has shifted from its initial military objectives into military and economic targets, particularly against Iran, and Iran is targeting its neighbors in the Gulf as well, infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Trump said on Truth Social that what he called the new regime leadership knew what needed to be done. Do you know who he's talking about here? Who is the U.S.'s interlocutor at this point?
For your own viewers, there is no direct or indirect talks between Iran and the United States. According to all Western intelligence services, all, including the American intelligence services and the German intelligence services and the Gulf intelligence services, Iran refuses to engage diplomatically with the United States under current conditions. I think Iran's strategy can be summarized as follows: more and more economic pain to force President Trump to blink first. So what we are seeing now, I think sadly and tragically, we are on an escalation ladder, that what comes next is much worse than we have seen in the past 4 weeks. So it's very concerning how the war is escalating now between Iran and its allies on the one hand, and the United States and Israel as well.
Yeah. Regime response so far, as opposed to what Donald Trump was suggesting, has been doubling down, threats of retaliatory strikes on infrastructure in the region. How much longer do you think this can keep escalating?
Really, no one knows. Anyone who tells you that they know is basically, they don't know what they're talking about. Even the closest advisors to President Trump cannot really read his mind. It was supposed to be, according to Israeli Prime Minister and Donald Trump, to be an easy war, a quick war, a clean war, with the assassination of the Iranian leaders and regime change. Now, think what we're all talking about: opening the Strait of Hormuz. Why? because of the surge of energy prices, high inflation. The world economy has slowed down. So the reality is there is no, glimmer of hope, because neither the Americans nor the Iranians are talking about to each other. And there are no firefighters. Where are the firefighters? Who's going to really provide Iran with guarantees that the United States and Israel will not attack Iran again? Where is the Security Council, the United Nations? Where is Europe? I mean, Europe, you in Berlin and I'm in London. Europe buries its head in the sand. It's unwilling to stand up and challenge President Trump. And China is happy where it is because basically it wants the United States to be where it is. Doubling down and digging in. And China is winning. And that's why China is unwilling to intervene in this really consequential geopolitical crisis. So without external actors who really try to mediate and bridge the divide between the United States and Iran, we are seeing more and more escalation. And now the second phase, what I said earlier, this targeting of civilian infrastructure, universities, factories, bridges, schools, pharmaceuticals, refineries, the energy, this could really basically become a greater economic shock to the world economy if the war continues much longer.
That was LSE's Fawaz Georgis. We appreciate your insights as always. Thanks so much.
Thank you.